Good morning. I'd like to share with you my number 7 in the series, Tales from the Sweet Brook, and this one's called A Call to Ministry. How does God call people to some special task? He calls people in various ways. In the Bible, we see that he called Moses through a burning bush. Now, that's unusual. I've never seen a burning bush that didn't consume. But he was calling him to do a great job to lead his people out of Egypt. He called Peter, Andrew, James, and John as they were by their boats fishing and said, "Come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men." And the other disciples he called in similar ways. And then the Apostle Paul has this life-changing experience on the road to Damascus where a voice from heaven and a bright light, and it blinded him. And Jesus was calling him to follow him. Now, my experience is much less dramatic than that. My experience is that God was calling me just through a strong urging that I must do something. It began in my early years. I was only 5 or 6 when I first started hearing the voice of God. I was at country school, and I would tell the kids I wanted to be a pastor, and I would sing songs and probably drove everybody crazy. But nevertheless, it was a call. God was calling me to something, a special time to serve him. Through my early years, I kept hearing that call as I attended the Methodist Church and heard many revival sermons, heard good preaching. I was involved in the Methodist youth group called MYF. I was involved with YFC. We had a Bible club that met at one of my friends' home in Greenville. And then, as I began my college career, again, I was feeling the call, and so I decided to major in philosophy religion. Now, philosophy is not my cup of tea. I really hate reading philosophy. But I went ahead and majored in that. I probably should have majored in math or science because those are the subjects I was best in high school. But I decided to go ahead, and I thought that was every pastor ought to go that route to take philosophy of religion, so I did. And I survived it. Probably didn't do as well as I should have because it just wasn't my thing. But I still was interested. I wanted to be a pastor. I remember going to homiletics class with Dr. Reinhardt, and my first sermon I preached there was, and I called it, "What are we standing for?" And everybody laughed because they were all sitting. So that wasn't a great way to start preaching. But I have to laugh about it now. My parents wanted me to go to Asbury Seminary, and it would have been a good choice. But I was struggling with a controlling mom, and I thought they were going to tell me all my shots to take, what I'd have to do. And I decided I didn't want to go that route because I wanted to cut the apron strings. So I enrolled at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, Deerfield, Chicago, and went there for 1 year. Well, as I told you before, philosophy was not my thing. Greek was not my thing. I took Greek in college, and I tried to take it in seminary, and I just was not really interested. It was Vietnam era, and I was trying to stay out of the military, and so I stayed in seminary for that year. But then a snowstorm came, and because of the snowstorm, I stopped going to classes. And by the time I was ready to go back to class, I couldn't remember what classes I had or what the assignments were. One of my professors, Dr. Walter Liefeld, who married Olive Fleming, the widow of Pete Fleming, one of the martyred missionaries in Ecuador, he said, "Ward, what's wrong? What's happening?" Now, he was the only professor at seminary that asked me what was going on. Now, I really appreciated that. It was later, after I completed 2 masters and a doctorate, that I wrote to him. I said, "Dr. Liefeld, I just want you to know I appreciate that you asked about what was going on. I was struggling during that year. But since then, I've completed 2 masters and a doctorate in ministry. And the good news is that I now feel okay about it, and I'm glad that you helped me. He wrote back. He was on a sabbatical in Tyndale College over in Europe. He wrote back a letter and said, thank you. He said, I was ready to quit serving as a professor at the seminary, about ready to go back to pastoring, but when you told me about that, I felt like maybe I am doing some good after all. And I prize that letter. It was a very special moment. So I only stayed at that seminary 1 year. It was time to leave. I wasn't applying myself. And they were offering jobs in the inner city to anybody who could teach, who had a college degree, even if you didn't have any education courses. And so I signed up for it and started my job in the inner city. Here's one of my classes I taught, first grade. Was I leaving God? No. Was I getting sidetracked? Perhaps. But the truth was, I still had the call. While I was in seminary, I was dating a Christian gal that I met at Greenville College, and she was from a Brethren church that didn't believe in ordained pastors. So I was having conflict. I'm studying for the ministry, I'm dating someone who doesn't believe in pastors, and I began to realize this was not going to work. But the call was still strong. It was later when I was teaching in the inner city that I met Norma, who later became my wife. Norma and I had a lot in common. She was from a Free Methodist background. I was from Methodist background. Very similar roots. Farm girl from Wisconsin. And we began to see that maybe this was a good choice. And so I got my draft notice. I had to leave the inner city. I was going to go to the military, basic training, and I asked Norma to marry me just before we left. We only had about 8 dates, but that was okay. We knew it was right. I never went to Vietnam, but I did go to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, and it was at that time that we got married right after that experience. After I finished military, I came back to Greenville, Illinois. Norma and I did. We had a mobile home. We moved back there. And I was struggling with what to do with my life. I was offered a job as an installment loan officer at First National Bank in Greenville, and so I took that job. And I did that for about 2 years. I loved meeting people, but I was not a banker. I still had this nagging call. I thought, well, maybe I need to be a teacher because I taught 2 years in Chicago. So I decided to finish my coursework that I needed to get my certification. All I had left to get at this point was student teaching. I did that in the summer. But after teaching for a few years, I said to Norma, I really think I still feel that call to ministry. So Norma said, well, you keep changing. I don't know, is this going to work? Well, fortunately, she stood beside me, behind me, whatever, with me. And I ended up taking a small church, Sorrento, Illinois, while I was teaching at Mulberry. Robert Smith, my superintendent, said he thought it would be a chance for me to get a feel for, is this something I really feel I should do? So I did that. And it was after a few years of being there, I decided it was time. Maybe I need to move on to a full-time position, and nothing was being offered to me in Central Illinois. I had been going to singing in a musical at the Greenville Free Methodist Church. It was a missions musical called Go Tell Your World. And this was really creating a sense in me that I really should move on and do something for the Lord. So there were several songs in this that really spoke to me. One was, I want Jesus in my life more than anything this world can offer me. Another song was, Can I trust him with my life? Another one said, it all depends. Would I leave the place where I've lived and settle down? It all depends. Break with my attachments, sentimental though they be. It all depends. Would I find myself uprooting all the stakes I've driven down? Now, I'm putting stakes down in Greenville, my hometown. Leaving friends and loved ones far behind. Captive to the call of some far-off distant land. Now, the far-off distant land ended up being Michigan. It wasn't overseas. But I answered that call, and we went to Michigan. And I've been pastoring ever since. I've spent now 40-some years, 42 years in ministry. God has, I feel like, has used me in different ways in different churches. I'm still pastoring at 75, a little country church. I'm in my 8th year there. And I believe that that's where God wants me right now. So the call is important. It may just be this nagging that doesn't leave you alone, that you can't do anything else. I did teaching, I did banking, I did military, but you know, that really wasn't what my calling was, but they helped me. God uses events in our lives to form us. I like this verse from Proverbs 16. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. In his heart, a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. Some are called to pastor. Some are called as missionaries. Some are called to teach. Some are called to work as a laborer. Some are called to farm. People are called in various ways, and some are called just to make lots of money and give the Lord's work. But find your calling, because God really wants to call us, and he wants to have us hear his call and to follow it. Thank you for listening today.